Afro Tales podcast is a part of the Connected Podcast Network. Ahoy, my friends. Welcome aboard the Afro Tales podcast. I'm your storyteller, Aman Mazinga. Join me as we explore the tales that grew from the people of Indigenous and African descent in the Americas and the Caribbean. After, come and see me, chef, who will impart upon you a recipe for the story you have just heard. So with no further ado, let us set sail on this new age of exploration. Big 16. Now, Big 16 was his name, because that was the size of his shoe. This was back in slavery times, when Big 16 worked for the old man. And Big 16 was so big and so strong that old man thought he could do anything, fetch anything. One time, the old man said, "Big 16, I want you to go down in the swamp and fetch me up some cypress seals." "Well, yes, sir," said Big 16. He went down to the swamp where some cypress trees had been sawed up into 12 by 12 timbers. That's the heaviest wood there is. But Big 16 picked up one load of 12 by 12s under one arm, and he picked up another load of 12 by 12s under the other arm, and he brought them up on to the house. Ain't no man been able to do that before nor since. Another time, the old man said, "Big 16, I want you to go down to the pasture and fetch me up them mules." "Well, yes, sir," said Big 16. And he went down to the pasture. Now, there were two of the bulkiest mules in the country. They had halters on them, so Big 16 took a hold of the halters and he pulled. And the mules hauled, and he pulled, and they hauled, until they had pulled them halters all to pieces. So Big 16 picked up one mule and put it under one arm. Then he picked up the other mule and put it under the other arm, and he brought him up to the house. "I law say, Big 16, said the old man, "you are so big and so strong, I believe you could catch anything. I believe you could catch me the devil himself." "Well, yes, sir," said Big 16. "If you get me a big pick and a big shovel and a 9-pound hammer." So the old man sent for them things, and Big 16 started in to dig a hole out in the side of the yard. He picked and shoveled on that hole for 30 days until he got down to where he was going to. He took that 9-pound hammer and he stepped on out into hell. Now, the devil's children were playing out in the dooryard when they saw that big black man a-coming. They run for the house crying, "Mama, Mama!" The devil's wife grabbed them children into the house and slammed the door. Big 16 walked up to the door and he knocked on the door with the hammer. Blam! Blam! The old devil himself was inside. "Who out there?" "It's Big 16. What you want?" "I want to see you." The devil opened the door, poked his head out, and Big 16 hit him. Blam! Over the head with a 9-pound hammer. Blam! Killed that old devil dead. Then Big 16 took the devil under one arm and he climbed back up that hole. He walked into the old man's house and threw the devil down on the front room floor. "I say loud, Big 16, cried the old man. I didn't really believe you'd fetch me the devil. Oh, he is so ugly. Get him out. Get him out of here. Yeah, we're gonna be sweeping up ugly for days." "Why, yes, sir," said Big 16, and he took the old ugly devil out and dropped him back down the hole. Now, well, Big 16 lived out his good long life, and at last he died and went up to heaven. St. Peter was standing there at the pearly gates when he saw that big black man a-coming. He said, "Now, hold on there. You can't come in." "And why not?" said Big 16. "I done lived a good life, a good clean life." "Oh, I know that," said St. Peter, kind of squirming. "I know you have, but the trouble is, you are so big and strong. If you got out of hand, there ain't nobody here could handle you. So you better go to some other place." "Why, yes, sir," said Big 16, disgusted like, and he went on down to hell. The devil's children were still playing out in the dooryard when they saw Big 16 a-coming. They run for the house crying, "Mama, Mama, here come that black man that killed Papa." The devil's wife grabbed the children into the house and slammed the door. Big 16 just walked up to the door. Knock, knock. The devil's wife called out, "What you want?" "Well, I want to come in." There was a long wait. Then the door opened just a teeny crack, and the devil's wife stuck her hand out. In her hand was a hot flaming coal. "You can't come in, but here's a little piece of fire. Now go start a hell of your own." And so, if you ever see a little light flickering down in the swamp at night, or a light moving around in the woods, you know it's Big 16 with his little piece of fire, looking for a place to go. The end. The Rainbow Crow. Long ago, before the two-legged walked the earth, the weather was always warm, and the animals were always happy. But one day, something happened to cause the earth to grow cold. Tiny crystals, glittering like diamonds, drifted down from the sky, covering earth with a sparkling softness. The animals, seeing snow for the first time, were not afraid. But soon the snow deepened. The mouse disappeared. The tip of his tail was all the animals could see, and they began to worry. Then Rabbit disappeared. The tips of his ears were all the animals could see, and they worried more. As they gathered together in the clearing deep inside the forest to talk about the weather, what was needed, they decided, was a messenger to travel at once to the great sky spirit and ask him to stop the snow. But who would be willing to leave Earth to visit the distant place where the sky spirit dwelled? Possum said, Owl is the wisest. Perhaps he should go. But no, the animals whispered. He might get lost in the light of the day, so Owl should not go. Then Beaver said, Well, perhaps Raccoon should go. But no, the animals argued. He might follow his tail instead of his nose, so Raccoon should not go. Then Skunk said, Perhaps Coyote should go? But no, the animals shouted. Coyote is clever and loves to play tricks. He might chase the clouds or swallow the wind, so Coyote should not go. Scritch, scratch, screech, scratch, yep, yep, yo, yo. The noisy animals screeched and howled because they could not decide who should visit the great sky spirit to ask him to stop the snow. And so the snow grew deeper and deeper and deeper. And the small animals climbed on the back of the tall animals so they would not disappear. Suddenly, down from the top of the tallest tree flew Rainbow Crow, the most beautiful bird on earth, who called out to all of the animals below in the sweetest voice of all birds, and he sang, I will go, I will stop the snow. And the animals, happy at last to have Crow as their messenger, chanted a song of praise. Aye, 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 rain, Rainbow Crow, stop the snow, Crow, fly to the sky high, rain, Rainbow Crow, aye, 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 aye. Then up into the sky flew Rainbow Crow, far above the snow and the winds of earth. Way beyond the moon, the stars, and the clouds. For 3 days, Crow flew, until he came upon the great sky spirit, who was too busy to notice. So Rainbow Crow began to sing. Oh, great spirit in the sky, you rule the earth from way up high. You make the creatures large and small. You are the ruler of us all. You make the trees and flowers grow. You call the wind and clouds to blow. You make the rain. You make the snow. You make the cold on earth below. Oh, great spirit in the sky, for you I sing this lullaby. The great spirit stopped to listen. Never before had he heard such a sweet voice sing such a beautiful song. And he told Crow to choose a gift. Now, Crow knew that far below on earth the snow was getting so deep that soon the animals would disappear. So he asked the great spirit to stop the snow. The great spirit replied, No, Crow, I cannot stop the snow, for snow has its own spirit. When snow spirit leaves the clouds to visit with its friends wind spirit, the snow will stop, but earth will still be cold. So Crow asked the great spirit to stop the cold. The great spirit replied, No, Crow, I cannot stop the cold. All I can do is give you a gift of fire. Fire will keep you warm and will melt the snow so that your friends will be content until warm weather returns. the Great Spirit put a bit of fire on the end of it and handed it to Crow.
I will give you this gift, but once. Hurry, fly back to Earth before the fire disappears.
Off flew Crow. On the first day, as Crow flew down, showering sparks of fire darkened his tail feathers. On the second day, as Crow flew down, the fire burned brighter and the stick grew shorter, and all of Crow's feathers were covered with soot. On the third day, as Crow flew down, the fire was so hot and the stick was so short that smoke and ash blew into Crow's mouth, and his voice became cracked and hoarse. When at last Crow returned to the clearing in the forest, all the animals had disappeared. Only the tops of the tallest trees could be seen. The branches sprouted through the deep snow. So Crow flew down, close to the pale ground, around and around until the fire melted the snow and his friends were safe. And this tiny stick of fire became the grandfather of all fires. And for this, all the animals on earth thanked Crow. They danced and chanted a song of praise. Aye, 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 kind, young, brave Crow saved us from snow, flew to the sky high, brought back fire. Now just plain Crow, no more rainbow. Aye, 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 aye. At last Crow, all alone, flew off to a distant tree where he wept. He was no longer beautiful. He could no longer sing a sweet song. His rainbow feathers were gone forever. When Snow Spirit emptied the clouds and joined Wind Spirit, the snow stopped. But Crow still wept. The Great Sky Spirit heard Crow and came down from the sky. And when he saw Crow, he said,
Soon the two-legged will appear on earth. He will take the fire and be master of all but you. For being so brave and unselfish, I give you the gift of freedom. The two-legged will never hurt you, for your meat tastes like fire and smoke. The two-legged will never capture you, for your beautiful voice is now crackly and hoarse. The two-legged will never want your feathers because your rainbow color is now black. But your black feathers will shine, and they will reflect all the colors on earth. If you look closely, you will see. Then Crow looked, and he saw hundreds of tiny rainbows shining in his black feathers. And he was content. The Great Spirit returned to his home in the distant sky, and Crow happily returned to his friends in the forest, proud that he was now Black Crow. The shining feathers full of tiny rainbows. The end.
Molly Cottontail. Aunt Nancy, said little Janie, who was sitting in the big kitchen of the plantation house. Do you know any more of them stories about Miss Molly Cottontail? I think she's almost as smart as Mr. Hare, and I like to hear about her almost as much. Almost as smart, said Nancy, throwing up her hands in surprise. Let me tell you that when a woman starts to be trickish, she can beat a man every time, 'cause her mind works a heap faster. She see all round and over and underneath and on both sides of things. To show what she meant, Aunt Nancy darted her head every which way, like a hen on the lookout for chicks and worms and weasels and chicken hawks at the same time. Meanwhile, a man's just trying to stare plumb through it. And she stared at Janie with such a wide-eyed, moon-calf look. The little girl began to giggle. Janie asked, "Why is she called Miss Molly Cottontail and not Mrs. Hare when she's married to Mr. Hare?" To this, Auntie replied, "I know she's called Miss Molly Cottontail because she never fancied herself just wholly and solely the wife of Mr. Hare. She ain't no sort of a female to settle down and just be plain Mrs. Hare all her days and stay home and listen to the children cry and wash their faces and comb their hair and cook their victuals year in and year out. Miss Molly just got too much get up in her for that. She make old man Hare stay at home and mind the children now and then, and he don't dare say no, neither." "Oh, please tell me a story about Molly," Jenny begged. "All I can say is you got to be the persistentest child I've ever run into," said Aunt Nancy. All the while kneading bread dough for the family supper, the woman began to tell, and it went like this. One day, Miss Molly and Mr. Fox went to visit Mr. Fox's brother, who lived across the swamp and down in the hollow. He was called Hungry Billy because he was all the time eating up folks' chickens. Molly was all dressed up in her fancy hat and shawl, and her good manners going along making herself mighty agreeable with chit-chat and little jokes. When the two reached Hungry Billy's house, Molly put her hat and shawl and handbag on the bed. Then she offered to cook supper, exclaiming, "I's can't bear to be idle, even if I's off on a visit." So she fixed pine bag tea and ash cakes. While she was working, Billy brought her a pot of butter to help her with the cooking. Molly, who loved butter more than anything else, said, "That's a mighty impressive lot of butter you got there. How do you keep it from spoiling on this warm day?" "I set that down in the stream where it cooled," Billy told her. Then he put the butter pot back while Molly watched through the window. After they had eaten their ash cakes and tea, Billy went off to run an errand, and Mr. Fox dozed off by the fire. But Molly took herself to the stream and lifted the stone crock of butter out of the water. At first, she was only going to take a bite, but that butter tasted sweeter with every mouthful. Soon, her greediness got the better of her. She ate up all the butter before she was sensible of what she was doing. Straight away, she put the empty jar back in the water and hightailed it back to the house. A short time later, when Mr. Fox woke up, he found Miss Molly sitting on a chair, looking as innocent as a lamb, going on with her knitting and humming a sweet little tune, just as if she'd never had butter on her mind or in her mouth. Soon after this, Billy returned. His guests told him goodbye, and they went back to their homes. Now, next morning, Billy discovered his butter crock was as empty as a sucked egg. He went first to Mr. Fox, and then to Molly Hare, and demanded, "Which of you went and ate up all my butter? The crock as clean as if it'd been scoured." Both said, "'Twasn't me." And Molly added, "Did." What I want with your butter anyway? I got plenty of butter at home. Plus, I got a mighty delicate stomach. I can't eat no butter less than I done churned it myself. Cause I can't be sure other folks been right clean and careful in their butter making. This made Billy even madder. And he sputtered out, well, maybe my butter wasn't so clean. I don't know about that. But I does know about this. It clean gone. Once more, one of you two is the thief who gone it. Then Billy, who was the biggest fox round, raised himself up to his full size and showed Molly Cottontail and Mr. Fox his teeth. I's gonna keep you both right here, he said, till one of you fess up. But Molly said to Billy, you let Mr. Fox and me lay down yonder in the sun all day. The heat of the sun gonna draw the butter right out the skin, and you know who done ate the butter. I don't know about that, said Hungry Billy doubtfully. It's the truth. Anyone can tell you that. It's just coincidental that I'm the one to remind you of this natural fact. How can you remind me what I didn't know afore now? Billy wondered. Well, now you know, said Molly Cottontail with a nod of her head. Next time when someone remind you of this thing, you can remember, because I just told you so. I don't know if I follows all that, said Billy, scratching his head. It real simple, said Molly, talking slow. Mr. Fox and me, we sleep in the sun. You go along about your business. When you get back, all you got to do is rub your fingers over our stomachs. That sun will draw out the butter and slick the fur of someone I can name. Here, she looked meaningfully at Mr. Fox. Only I ain't going to go cussing someone without proof. Then you know in a jiff who done ate your butter. All right, I suppose, said Billy, settling down to watch Miss Molly and Mr. Fox and the sun. No, cried Miss Molly. You got to go about your business, because it take a long time for the sun to draw out that butter. I ain't got no business, Billy protested. The only business you ain't got is accusing innocent people like me of thievery. What business you is got is what you mind yourself when you get out of here so you can do it. Now, Billy might have asked her to explain that more, but somehow Miss Molly's clarifying only seemed to muddy the waters. With a sigh, Billy went off to find what business he was going to meet up with. Then Miss Molly pretended to fall asleep, while Mr. Fox, his mind innocent of this particular crime, really did fall asleep. As soon as Hungry Billy was out of sight and Mr. Fox was snoring away, Molly went to her larder, took the last bit of her own butter, and smeared it over the sleeping fox's stomach, so soft that he didn't feel it. Then she licked her paws clean and laid down in her place again, pretending to fall asleep herself. When Hungry Billy returned and found the butter on the speechless fox's fur, he began to accuse his cousin of being a thief. At that moment, Miss Molly Cottontail began to stretch and rub her eyes and pretend like she just woke up. Just listen to all the arguing for a few minutes, and then she commenced to say, "Laws of mercy, I wouldn't believe this if
I ain't seen it with my own eyes. I'm certainly scandalized that a friend of mine took to stealing, and most especially on the polite visit. I declare to goodness my feelings is so hurted that I can rightly express myself. What's more, I can't stay here associating with a common thief. I got my innocent young family to think about. And off she scooted, while the foxes kept accusing each other of all manner of crimes. So it turned out, Aunt Nancy said to little Janie, a coolness sprung up in that fox's family that lasted a lot of years. And it was all on account of that crock of butter. Then the woman shook her head saying, I tell you, child, that it don't take much to start a family quarrel. But it takes a heap of time and trouble to patch one up. Just the same as it do the holes where your brother Ned snags his britches. And those britches never do seem the same after the patching, neither. The end. Now let me fly. A story from Mina. I will never forget the day I wanted to fly. My name was Mina then. I lived in Africa. It was many years ago, in 1815. But I can remember the day as if it was yesterday. My life was so happy then. That day, my mother and I were selling baskets and mats for straw at the marketplace. I became troubled when I saw a beautiful bird beating its wings against its wooden cage trying to escape. You should be free, little bird, I whispered. I opened the cage door and watched as the bird spread its wings and flew away. I wished I could fly above the clouds with it. My mother didn't scold me, even though the man who owned the bird shouted and waved his fist angrily at me. She just pressed some of our baskets into the man's hands to quiet him, and then said these words to me. You did the right thing, my daughter. No living thing should ever be confined. Later, we crossed the savannah on our walk home. I heard the sound of drum beats. Mother, I said in anticipation, do you hear the drums? Will they be dancing tonight, or will the old ones tell their stories? No, child. There is no joy in the sound of those drums, said my mother. Hurry, we must get home. When we arrived at our settlement, day had already dissolved into night. Many had gathered in a circle, their faces lit by the flickering campfire. The council of elders was meeting, presided over my father, the chief. It seems a man from our compound named Dongo was on trial. I was not surprised, for this was not Dongo's first trial. My father challenged Dongo. It is said that you kidnapped some of our people and sold them as slaves. No one has seen you commit this outrage, but your past leads us to believe you are the only one among us who would harm us. Therefore, you are banished from this settlement, Dongo. Leave here and never come back, or your life will come to a quick and painful end. Two men led Dongo away. The next morning, I played in my family's compound. I hummed the songs my mother sang to me as a baby. Only steps away, my mother ground grain with the other women while humming the same soft melodies of love and family.
When I thought I saw the little bird I had freed from its cage at the marketplace flying above me, I followed its flight all the way to the outskirts of the settlement. I flapped my arms as it flapped its wings, as if that could allow me to fly. Therefore, I didn't hear the footsteps that came up behind me, nor did my mother hear my muffled screams as my kidnapper covered my mouth with his hand and dragged me away. All that could be heard echoing through the trees were Dongo's rantings. "Banish me, will you? Banish me?" I will never forget how it felt to be forced to walk, bound, beaten, for endless miles, each step taking me farther away from my mother and father. As I was marched, hundreds of other shackled and stumbling black men, women, and children taken as prisoners of war or kidnapped like me joined us. We were herded by slave catchers like Dongo across Western Africa up to the edge of the Western Shore. Within days, pale, ghost-like men arrived to transact business with Dongo and the others. The white men took us, a few at a time, in small wooden boats into a large ship anchored offshore. There, they forced us to lie on rough wooden planks, side by side, so close together that there was no more than a whisper and a prayer between us. What I will forever remember is meeting a boy named Amadi, who sat beside me on the foul-smelling ship. Within moments of our meeting, he began to take care of me, and I took care of him. When Amadi was sick with the dreaded fevers, I comforted him by singing the songs my mother taught me. When I tossed and turned with hunger, Amadi often said, "Take some of my gruel, little bird." As he wiped away my tears, Amadi would say, "Raise your head high, Mina. You are the daughter of a prince, the granddaughter of a great king. Yours is a great African heritage. No one can ever take that from you." It was 3 long months before the big wooden ship finally dropped anchor on the shores of a land called America. They herded those of us who had survived the painful voyage off the ship in shackles and chains. Amadi and I stood on a platform in front of many white men and women who bid for us as though we were cattle or goats at the marketplace. A tall white man with the cold eyes of a snake bought Amadi and me for what I later found out was less than $100 each. The man who bought us forced us to call him Master Clemens. Then he took away our names and told us, "Never speak a word of your savage language again." Even though we were just children, Master Clemens put Amadi and me to work in the cotton fields. From dawn to dusk, 6 days a week, until our backs nearly broke under the weight of our labor. Almost overnight, Amadi and I grew from boy and girl to man and woman. As we grew, so did our love for one another. Soon, our master gave us permission to get married. Every slave on the plantation came to watch us jump the broom into marriage at the wedding ceremony. In time, I gave birth to 4 beautiful children. Amadi and I raised our family in a tiny shack with the meager rations our master gave us and these rags on our backs as our reward. Though we lived in misery, captured in a cage of slavery, at least we had each other. But then I thought my life would truly in when my master told me, "I have sold your husband away." It had been years since I had heard my father's voice, and years since I had felt my mother's caress. And then my husband was taken away before I could even say goodbye. I was never to hear another word from him again. My 4 children were all that I had in life. I had to do all I could to try to keep the rest of my family together. My hopes for my family were denied as soon as my oldest child, Joshua, began to grow toward manhood. By then, everyone could see that my boy had a special gift. It was when he talked to the horses, they understood every word. Master Clemens saw the bond my son had with animals and sought to profit from it. The last time I ever saw Joshua, he was in chains in the back of a wagon. He was on his way to be sold to another plantation, just as his father had been sold away only a year earlier. "Please, Master, don't tear my family apart again. You can't sell Joshua. Don't sell my son," I pleaded. But Master Clemens just pushed me aside. "That boy is more mine than yours," he yelled as the wagon drove away. Word was passed across the country from slave to slave. After an unbearably long time, I found out that Joshua had been sent to the Randolph plantation, hundreds of miles away. Joshua will learn from their blacksmith all about the anvil and the fire. He will probably be hired out to bring more profits to his new master. A promise that Joshua made was also passed on to me. He vowed, "Mama, I will save every penny I am allowed to keep to buy freedom for my whole family." My second child, Sally, was so smart. She taught herself to read by listening to our master's children at their lessons. But in Georgia, it was against the law for a slave to know how to read. So Master Clemens took a whip to my Sally. She stood there and took the lashings and didn't even cry. That child has the will of iron and a head that won't be bowed. I feared for her. That's no way for a slave to be. So I woke Sally one night, hugged her, and put her in the arms of friends who would risk their lives taking my child up north to freedom. I cry every time I hear the song they sang when I saw her for the very last time. They were signaling to the other escaping slaves to steal away. Months later, I received a letter. I had to find someone to read it to me. The moment I first heard it, I memorized every word. "Mama, please don't worry about me. I am safe. Though our travels were not easy, for 6 weeks we forded streams and walked hundreds of miles at night, always following the North Star. During the day, we fell asleep in cold, wet, dark caves as we hid from slave catchers. Free black people and sometimes even white people offered us refuge. Mama, you should have seen how happy we were when we arrived at the rock with the P that told us we were at the Mason-Dixon line. We knew that in the state of Pennsylvania, we could finally be free. I love you, Mama. Sally." My boy Mason was smart like his sister and talented like his brother. He had a gift, but it wasn't for how fast he could pick a row of cotton. That boy could take the banjo his daddy made and play it till even the birds tried to dance. But my master saw the joy we found in Mason's music. He raised his whip to my boy to stop his banjo playing. And I knew right then that if Mason stayed on this plantation, he would only become a beaten, broken slave in the fields. I sent word up north to Sally, the daughter I had not seen in 6 winters. In due time, she answered my prayers. A strange black man came to our door and said, "I have come to help Mason steal away." I waited 6 months to hear what had become of my son. Then I found this note slipped under my cabin door. "Mama, Mason has been taken to Florida to live with a Seminole Indian family. For now, Mama, that is the best I can do to help Mason be free. Don't worry, somehow I'll find a way to bring our family back together again. Your loving daughter, Sally." Katie is my last child. She's my youngest. My dearest Katie, I do not know what I will do if she's ever taken from me. Katie is now working in the plantation's big house. She has humbled herself to Master Clement's daughter. Our young mistress has told my daughter that neither she nor I will be sold if Katie remains her dutiful servant. I'm telling my last child the story of her heritage, the story my own parents once told me. I'm showing her how to make beautiful quilts and pottery from coils of red Georgia clay, like the ones I made as a child in Africa. We will probably never be released from this prison of slavery and rise to freedom like my Sally and my Mason. But Katie and I will somehow find comfort in our lives. Katie and I often walk together to the boundaries of the Clemens plantation. As we walk, we hear singing. And if I try real hard, I almost hear my mother's voice. The women are singing that old hymn, "Now Let Me Fly," a song about a promised land that slaves can only find up in heaven. When I hear that old song, I search the sky for that little African bird, and I dream of freedom. The end. 4 creations. The world began long ago in a place called Kichi, where the Kichi people lived. We shall tell how mysteries came out of the shadows, out of the past. These things were brought to light by the Maker and Former, who had many names: Hunter Possum, Hunter Coyote, Feathered Serpent, Heart of Sky, Heart of Earth, Grandfather, Grandmother, etc. There was once the ancient book of wisdom, written a long, long time ago. It was a great story about the birth of heaven and earth. There were 4 creations. Here is a telling of all these things. The first creation. There was no one at first. There was not one animal yet. No bird, fish, or tree. There was no rock or forest, no canyon, no meadow. There was sky separated from all things. The face of the earth was invisible. There was nothing that could make a sound. There was the sea, so calm and all alone. There was dark and night, and sea murmurings, ripplings. Yet within the dark and night and sea, there was the Maker, and there was the feathered serpent. Maker and feathered serpent came together. They were in the calm water, and they were brilliant. They glittered with all light. They were there, wrapped in blue and green feathers. They were the great thinkers, and so it is that there was sky and heart of sky. Thus is God, and so he is called. Behold the heart of sky and his 3 signs: lightning, hurricane, new lightning, and blue-green lightning. And they, the 3 flashes, who were the heart of sky, came to feathered serpent. And came the word of God, spoken with Maker and feathered serpent. Together they thought and figured out. All of them discussed what must be done to bring life and light. What would light be and dawn? Who would bring food? Who would provide? And they thought their words together, joined them with their thoughts, planned creation. Their words and thoughts were so clear that whatever they said came to be. Let it be that water should be emptied, they said. There will then be plate of earth to be made ready for sowing and brightening and warming. They created earth by saying it. Earth, they said, earth. And there it was, suddenly forming out of dust and mist. Mountains and valleys, they thought. Their magic and power brought trees to cover mountains. Pines, they said. The pines came to be. Feathered serpent was pleased. I'm glad you have come, O heart of sky, it rejoiced. Lightning, hurricane, new lightning, blue, green lightning. So the earth was ready, as they were first in the universe to think of each thing and say it. Sky and earth were parted and made perfect. Next, they thought of wild animals to guard the forest. There would be deer and birds, panthers and serpents. Deer and panthers would walk on 4 feet. There would be places for all of them, in the trees and thickets, in the bushes, in the hollows and caves, so they might rest and sleep and stay. The wild animals, the first creation, were told by God, speak, don't mutter or cry out, talk, each one to each one, and each kind to each group of you. Say our names, praise the God. We are mother and father. Speak to us as who we are. Lightning, hurricane, new lightning, and blue-green lightning, heart of sky, maker, feathered serpent. But the deer and birds and panthers and serpents just rustled. They rattled and roared and howled and warbled. They just twittered and chattered. They could not talk like men, like humans. They would not. They all cried out in different sounds. There was no language. Maker heard and said, they can't say our names. They can't praise us. We are their makers. And we shall have to begin again. So the gods said to first creation, you do not speak, so we will change you and remake you. As you are now, you are brought low. You will serve, you will not lead. You, bird, deer, You will stay where you are, where you sleep and eat, in the forest and canyons, among trees and bushes. You will be eaten. You will kill and be killed. You will stay low and serve, since you cannot talk and praise your God. So it was. Try it again, the word. And quickly, because the planting time was coming, the brightening time. Second creation. Maker tried again to create praise giver and food bringer. This time the human form was made out of wet earth, out of mud. They who were God made the body, but it looked bad, not good. It fell apart. It was so damp and watery. It didn't look at them who made it. It had a face on one side of its head. It made no sense when it tried to speak. "It can't walk," said Maker. "It can't make more of itself. It won't last. It will just get wetter." So they let second creation melt on the watery sea. Only the thought of it was left. Then they made another plan to create man, so they could have praise and prayers. The next man would be carved from wood. Find it and carve it and shape it. Fix it with corn and red bean. Make it carved of wood, said Heart of Sky and Feathered Serpent, the third creation. "See," they said of the third creation, "it turned out nicely. It can speak." And so it was that men were made of carved wood. They were wood models. They looked as people looked. They walked. They talked. They multiplied. The earth was full of them. There were sons and daughters, but there were no minds. There were no hearts. There were no memories of the Maker. They did not remember the heart. They did not remember the Heart of Sky and Feathered Serpent. But they were the first numbers of people covering the earth. They were as wood dummies. They were as the model then for humankind. Their arms and legs were too thin, too wooden. So, the Heart of Sky brought a flood down on them. It was a great flood made to destroy them. They were broken up into the houses of the wood ones. What was left of them came the animals of the forest, the first creation. All of them came, big and small. They turned on the carved ones. They gouged them and gnawed them and tore them and crunched them. Their dogs told the wood ones, "You caused us pain. You ate us. Now we will eat what is left of you." And they did. Some of the wood ones escaped to the forest. You can still see them living up in the trees. They are monkeys. That is why monkeys look so human. They are what is left of the wood dummies who would not think, would not walk straight, and were destroyed. The final creation. Here begins true man's beginning, and the search for that which would make his body. The Maker, Heart of Sky, and Feathered Serpent spoke, "The dawn has come, morning has come for the people of the earth. And here the thoughts of Maker came in light. The sun, moon, and stars were coming soon, and they, the All-God, pondered as to what should make human flesh, and where it should come from. As they thought and thought, 4 animals came to them: mountain cat, coyote, little parrot, and crow. These 4 came from broken place, where yellow corn and white corn were plentiful. And these corns would be the human design, with water as blood. These would flesh out the formed and shaped people, the final creation. The animals showed them the way to get there. Maker was joyful to find this mountain overflowing with yellow and white corn ears. And there were also honey and sweet foods, fruit and vegetables. Small and great plants there too. The white and yellow corn was ground to fill many bushels, and with water there came human fat. Maker and Feathered Serpent said, "Make the first mother and father. We use yellow corn with white corn to build the flesh. We use food for the legs and arms of humankind. These will be the first fathers, the 4 original who are men. And these are the names of the first humans who were formed. First is Jaguar Kichi. Next is Jaguar Knight. Third is Mahu Kuta. Last is Wind Jaguar. These are the names of our forefathers, formed and shaped, never born of a mother, had no father. They are themselves great ones, formed by Maker and Feathered Serpent. And they were human, the 4 humans. They talked, they saw, they heard and listened, they worked and walked. They looked good, and they were good humans. They were handsome. They saw all at once. They knew everything under the heaven. As soon as they looked at earth and sky, they knew all very deeply. They could see through trees and rocks. They could see through people. Oh, those 4 were the best and the first: Jaguar Kichi, Jaguar Knight, Mahukuta, and Wind Jaguar. Maker asked them, "Do you know? Do you look? How good is your speech?" The 4 beings saw everything under the sky clearly and perfectly. They gave thanks to Maker. "Praise be, thanks to you, having formed us. 3 times thanks to have made us. We have mouths and we can talk. Thank you, grandmother, grandfather." "Well, this isn't good," Maker said. "You understand too much. You don't need to know everything perfectly." So Maker took back some of it, took off a little of the vision that could see everything so clearly. "Let it become like this," the All-God said. "Since they are only our designs, they shouldn't know or see too much. They are not God, but men only. Let them be satisfied with sowing and reaping and mourning. We'll take them apart somewhat. We'll weaken their eyesight so that up close will be clear, but they won't see everything far away." And the 4 humans were made to lose their complete knowing of all things. They knew some and a little more, but not everything. Not like the heart of sky knew as God. So it was that the final creation was done, the forming and making of the first grandfathers and fathers by heart of sky and heart of earth. And the mates to man came. Their wives came into being by God's word. Sea House was the wife of Jaguar Kichi. Fish House was the wife of Jaguar Night. Hummingbird House was the wife of Mahukuta. Parrot House was the wife of Wind Jaguar. These were the names of the wives, and they were noble. They gave birth to tribes, great and small, all of them. There you have the root of us, we who are the Kichi people. The end. When the paths vanished. It was a glorious day in Cuba, like any other. Sunshine spread its rays in every corner, making the plants bloom and grow. Coffee was ready for harvesting, fruits were ripe for picking, and people greeted each other with their usual warmth and optimism while setting off to work. That's when they noticed that the roads had closed. All of the paths across the island leading to other villages and the coast had suddenly vanished overnight. In their place grew a forest with thick, wild grass towering over 30 feet high. It was believed by the people that Iku, the Yoruba dark spirit of death, was blocking the paths. He was guarding the roads and making it impossible to pass. If you attempted to cross through the tightly knitted branches of grass, you would be taken by Iku and never seen again. Everyone, everywhere was trapped. People in the north of the country who had been visiting from the south could no longer return to their homes. Neighbors wanting to spend time with friends elsewhere could no longer see them. It was a complete lockdown across the island. Feelings of despair and isolation soon grew in the people's hearts. With thoughts of escaping and dominating their minds, those who did leave never returned. They were feared dead, captured by death. After a while, time ceased to exist. Celebrations and events felt weary and pointless without any future hope of change. Those from the coast that were trapped in the hills wept at the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, for it reminded them of the waves crashing in the sea. Those from the hillside, marooned by the coast, they were tormented by the sound of the sea breeze, for it carried memories of the forest sounds, gently whispering from the shore. Time passed, as time does with villages turning to decay. Gardens were no longer maintained, and buildings were rotting with disrepair. Most people had vanished along with the paths, but an old couple remained in the eastern village of Baracoa, surrounded by sweet-smelling cocoa trees and coffee plants. They nurtured the land and each other. Together, they had 20 children over the years, boys and girls, with wavy black hair and skin the color of cinnamon bark. They brought so much joy to their parents and other villagers
who were old enough to remember a time when they were free to roam. But eventually, each child grew up and wanted to leave their home. They'd turn to their parents and say, "I want to know what is beyond the village. I need to find out for myself." No matter how much their parents begged them to stay, they eventually vanished into the haze of overgrown bush and were never seen again. The couple had finally resolved to live out their elderly years without the comfort of their children, when a truly magical thing happened. The old woman gave birth again, this time to identical twin boys, who they named Tewu and Kayinde. The elders in the village called the boys Ibeyas, sacred twins, and praised the African gods for their arrival. The powerful Orisha Obatala had breathed life into them. They all agreed, knowing that somehow the village had been blessed by their birth. Everyone felt a renewed sense of hope. The boys were doted upon by all the women in the village, who loved them as much as their own sons. Their supple bodies and hair were smoothed daily with coconut oil. They grew tall and strong, fed on a diet of viandes, of green plantain, cassava, and sweet potatoes. It was impossible to tell the twins apart. They were like two cocoa beans in a pod. If you looked closely, you could see that Tewu, the youngest, had eyes the color of dark coffee, while Kiande's eyes were a reddish shade of mahogany. A soft light shimmered from their smiling faces, which people felt was a divine mark that signaled the good fortune they would bring. Olorun, the sky Orisha who holds up the heavens, is protecting our Ibeyas, they say whenever they pass by. Cheeky and mischievous, the boys played tricks on anyone who could not tell them apart. No, that was Tewu, who promised he'd help you mend the chair. I am Yende. He giggled to his neighbors, cupping his hands over his mouth to cover rows of dazzling white teeth. One day, just like their siblings before them, Tewu and Yende turned to their parents and said, "We want to know what is beyond this village. We need to go out and find out for ourselves." Their parents were devastated. "No, not my Ibeyas. I cannot bear it," wailed their mother, beating the earth with her fists. Pain and sorrow threatened to seep through the village again until one of the elders spoke up. "Let us rejoice in the bravery and hold a fiesta to wish the twins good luck on their way." The women sashayed out in their long bata cabana dresses, layered with cherry red, sunrise orange, and white ruffled edges. They twirled and formed a circle. The twins stood in the middle, wearing their white cotton guayaberas and shorts. People danced up to them and placed lime green guava fruit in their deep pockets for their journey. Everyone waved along palm leaves in the air and sang, "Shine, Ibeya, shine. Let the paths open up for you. Shake Ubeas, shake. Let the sun and moon guard you.
Tewu and Kayende kissed their parents goodbye and walked into the forest. The thick grass parted for them, opening up a path so that they could easily walk their way. It then closed up right behind them so that no one else could get through. Paths vanished again. Protected by their shimmering light, the boys marched north for 7 days in the direction of the coast. Their plan was to walk along the edge of the island and see if any of the paths to other villages would open up for them. They strolled over rocky hills abundant with black walnut trees, stopping only to eat the rice and beans their mother had packed. At night, they slept under the stars, undisturbed by the scratching sound of critters who crept out to feed. On the 8th day, they reached the island coast and saw the vast sea for the first time in their lives. Their eyes stretched to the edge of the horizon, and they gasped in awe at the wonder at the sight. A light blue canvas of sky, dotted with white clouds, was mirrored in the crystal clear waters beneath it. Tewu turned to his brother and said, "Look, the sky is touching the water. There's no end to the sea. It goes on forever." They stood still and felt the sea breeze caress their faces and listened to the gentle shh, shh, shh of the waves rolling in. It was their first taste of freedom, and they wanted to run down the hill and dive into the water, but another sound interrupted their reverie. It sounded like 100 frogs croaking, followed by the sound of 100 horses shuddering down below. They looked down the hillside and saw a long stretch of golden sand littered with human bones. Skulls, arms, legs, and spines were piled on top of each other, surrounding the enormous body of a giant beast. The ghastly sounds were coming from him. He was slumped on his side, sleeping with his cavernous mouth wide open and snoring loudly. The foul stench of a rotting flesh drifted in their direction with each exhale. The giant was Okuri Boroko. He was the devil who had closed up all the roads, and his colossal body was stretched across the beach, blocking their way. Look at the size of that giant. His legs are thick, like gnarly tree trunks, and his enormous body could fill our whole house. Tewu stared in amazement. What a stink! Kende pinched his nose to mask the smell. How will we get past him? He asked his brother, worried that their bones would end up on the pile with the others who had got this far. There's no way that they could cross to the other side of the island without waking him. Quick, don't let him see us, said Tewu, tugging his brother's arm. They crouched down in the grass and stared at this unsightly giant. His boulder-sized head was covered with red feathers hanging from a mass of tangled hair. One eye was closed and the other was bulging slightly open, revealing a black pupil that stared out blankly. Occasionally, he lifted his heavy arm and swatted away mosquitoes buzzing around his face. "I will arouse him," said Tewu. "You lie low and stay here." He marched down the hill, whistling as he went, expecting the giant to wake up and roar. But he didn't. He carried on sleeping and snoring heavily. "Wake up!" yelled Tewu. "You're in my way. I want to pass." He stood with his hands on his hips, staring straight at the devil. Okori Boroku lazily lifted one eye and closed it again. It was clear to Tewu that he would not stir easily. Perhaps he has been sleeping for many years, he thought. He lifted his foot and kicked the giant's arm. "Get up!" yelled Tewu again. This time, he pulled the devil's feathers on his head and then jumped back to a safe distance. Okori Boroku opened his eyes and saw the Ibeye standing before him. He stood up slowly, yawned loudly, and looked down at Tewu. "What are you doing here, boy? Do you know who I am?" he roared, revealing long, jagged teeth that flashed like spears in his mouth. "I would like to pass, please. You are in my way. Look at my teeth, boy. I am hungry. I have not had any people to eat for a long time." The giant looked him over from head to toe. Tewu stood his ground. He barely came up to the height of the giant's waist. "You need to let me pass. You need to let everyone pass." His voice remained firm as he stared defiantly into Okori Boroku's dark eyes. The devil chuckled, admiring Tewu's bravery. "Perhaps I could have some fun with this boy before I devour him," he thought to himself. He turned to Tewu and offered him a challenge. "I like to dance, boy. It's been a long time since I have danced." He handed Tewu a tall, barrel-shaped makuta drum. "Play this drum, and if I like your rhythm, I will dance. Play, and we will see who grows tired first. If I stop, then you shall pass. But if you stop, then I shall eat you up, and your bones can join the others." Okori Boroku threw back his head and howled in laughter. Tewu took the makuta drum and climbed up the hillside near where his brother was crouching. "I'll play from here while you dance." Then he slapped his open hand on the drum, one at a time, sending loud, soaring beats. Ka, 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 ta, ka, 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 ta. The devil lifted his feet and began to dance. He stamped in the sand and swung his long arms at the side of his waist. He shook his head from side to side, making the bright red feathers in his hair twist around. "I like it. Play, boy, play," growled the devil. Tewu increased his rhythm, hitting the drum with the edge of his hand, then slapping it
with the other. The devil danced furiously, urging him to carry on. He danced for hours, swinging his hips and shrugging his shoulders in time with the beat. Tewu's hands continued drumming until they were stinging, red raw with pain. His brother lay on his tummy, watching through the tall blades of grass. He crawled along, inch by inch, until he was right beside Tewu's feet. He waited patiently for a sign to take over. The sun began to set, drawing a blanket of darkness across the sky. The devil twirled around, and when his back faced the boys, Kayende sprung up from the grass and Tewu dropped down. They exchanged places without the devil seeing. Kayende continued to play the drum with all his might. "Dance, devil! Dance until you drop!" he sang, slapping the drum even faster. Smoke poured out of Okori Boroku's nostrils and ears as he spun around wildly. Birds of darkness joined in the dance, with night owls screeching and winged bats flapping around the devil's head. Tewu had crawled away into the hillside and was hiding behind a tree where he could rest and drink water without being seen. This went on for 2 days and 2 nights, with the Ibeyas switching places while the devil danced to the beat of the drum. Finally, on the 3rd day, the sun reached the highest peak. His feet began to slow down. Sweat dripped down the side of his face, and venomous blood leaked from his eyes and ears. He wanted the drum to stop beating so he could stop dancing. His body ached and his strength ebbed away in the merciless heat. Still, the devil danced on into the night, and with his breath labored and his voice hoarse, he croaked, "Play, boy! Play!" And when he uttered those last words, his body swayed backwards and he dropped dead into the sand. The Ibeyas ran down the hillside and circled the body. "Your curse is lifted, Okori Boroku. It is our time," they said. And they were right. With the devil now defeated, the paths opened up. The knotted blades of brush and grass drew back and roads appeared. The twins climbed up high into a silk cotton tree, also known as the Tree of Life and home to all spirits. They sat amidst its majestic branches, over 200 feet high above the ground, and called out to Orisha Obatala, "Restore the lives of the people taken by Okori Boroku. Bring back their souls once more." Their voices rang out into the night sky, where their prayer was heard by the powerful spirit. In the valley below, the spirits took up their bones, lying scattered along the paths that had been closed by Okori Boroku. They breathed life into their bodies and returned to their families and homes. The Ibeyas had conquered the devil and brought love and light back to the island. To this day, Ibeyas are seen as the guardians of the past. Their presence ensures that peace will always be maintained. The end.
Anansi and Mongoose. Once upon a long time ago, Anansi and Mongoose were offered a day's work on a local farm. After toiling away in the blazing hot sunshine, the farmer gave them some coconut water to quench their thirst and explained how he would pay them. "Come into my barn and you will see 2 ropes hanging out of the window. Choose any rope you like and you can keep what is on the other end." They followed the farmer into his barn and saw the 2 ropes lying on the floor with each end hanging out of the window. One rope was long and thin, but the other was thick and heavy. You can guess which Anansi wanted. He rushed up to the thick rope and declared, "This one is mine. I got it first." He grabbed it and began to imagine the abundance of riches at the other end. Mongoose began somewhat measured in his approach, picked up the thin rope, and they began to pull. The farmer shook his head and chuckled to himself in the corner of the barn. This one has something big and juicy at the end," said Anansi, struggling to pull the thick, heavy rope. Mongoose took his time pulling the thin rope. He was just happy to be getting anything at all. What Anansi and Mongoose didn't know was that farmer had tied a great big cow to the end of one rope and a tiny chicken to the end of the other. As soon as Mongoose saw that he had a great big cow as his payment, he let out a long whoopee. "Look at this! What a surprise!" Anansi, on the other hand, was not pleased when he saw his tiny chicken on the end of his rope. But he didn't show it. "Oh," he sang, "I'm going to have some nice roast fowl for dinner." Before parting ways, Anansi invited Mongoose to sleep over at his home for the night. "You've been working hard all day, Mongoose. Rest yourself tonight and travel tomorrow." It sounded like a good idea. And so the trusting Mongoose accepted crafty Anansi's offer. During the night, while Mongoose was asleep, Anansi crept out to where the cow had been tied up in his yard. He cut off its tail and hid the cow in the bush beside his house. Then that crafty spider buried the tail in the ground, leaving only the bushy end sticking out of the earth. The following morning, after a delicious breakfast of fresh eggs from Anansi's new chicken, Mongoose went to retrieve his cow. "I'll be on my way now, Anansi. Thank you for breakfast," he said. They strolled out to the front yard where Anansi started howling in horror. "Oh no! Look at your crosses, Mongoose!" He stood at the cow's tail, poking out of the ground. "Your cow must have gone walking underground, and now he's stuck." Anansi held his head in mock dismay and continued, "Quick, Mongoose! You better pull it out!" Mongoose couldn't believe his eyes. He hurried over to the tail and tugged it from the ground. It immediately popped out in his hand. He stood there, holding the cow's tail. "Oh no!" cried Anansi, even louder. "Look what you've done, Mongoose! You've lost your cow!" Mongoose was stunned into silence. Anansi put his arm around his shoulder and offered some hope. Don't worry, my friend. You can make some nice tail soup from that. Poor Mongoose started to bawl. I don't want tail soup. I want my cow back. I'll tell you what. Let me help you out. Why don't you take my fowl and have it instead? I feel bad for you, Mongoose. Mongoose refused to take Anansi's chicken. I don't want any chicken. I had my mouth set for some cow. With his head hung low, he thanked Anansi for letting him stay and then headed off to his own home. Once he was out of sight, Anansi did a little dance of victory. For now, he had a cow and a chicken all to himself. Jack Mandora, me no choose none. Story number 2, Hyena and the Fowl. One fine day, Fowl was cooking up his dinner deep in the middle of the forest. He was in a great mood. He began putting together a pile of twigs and shrubs under the shade of a baywan tree. He lit a fire and sang to himself as ribbons of smoke danced above him through the leaves. I have sweet potatoes and plantain too. Mixed with yam, I make nice fufu. With a long stick, he poked and prodded the fire, turning over his sweet potatoes and plantains. Almost done, he thought. It was twilight, and the forest was heaving with nightfall. The fireflies swarmed through the undergrowth, their bodies swimming in the darkness. The tree frogs clung to branches and warmed up their voices, ready to croak out the night chorus, their bulging red eyes piercing the night. In the distance was Hyena, panting, breathless, and vexed. He'd become separated from his pack, and he was sure his friends were all feasting somewhere on the last hunt. The smell of the roasting sweet potatoes and ripe plantain weaved through the forest, past the giant tree ferns, right into Hyena's nostrils and down toward his empty belly. He stepped lightly through the forest, following the sweet scent until he saw 2 large horns hovering above a fire. There was Bruh Fowl, licking his lips and singing to himself. I have sweet potatoes and plantain too. Mixed with yam, I make nice fufu. Evening! Hyena's voice was tough like nut brittle. Bruh Fowl jumped back. He moved his neck from left to right and blinked through the flames. He couldn't see anyone beside himself, but he knew that voice. That's you, Hyena. I'm hungry. Hyena stayed in the shadows. Well, I have plenty of good food, roast sweet potatoes and plantains. You can share some with me, he offered. I'm hungry for fowl. Bruh Fowl stepped back. His eyes darted through the trees, checking for an escape route. He knew he could never outrun Hyena. Listen, hold up a minute, said Bruh Fowl. Why don't you just let me finish my meal and then we can eat? A full-bellied fowl is surely more appetizing
than an empty-bellied one.
Hyena came forward and revealed himself. His black eyes carried death. His jaws were gaping wide as if he was about to laugh.
Please, Hyena, just let me just eat my food quickly, and then you can eat me.
Bruh Fowl sounded so desperate the hyena agreed. Fowl filled with sweet potatoes and plantains would make a nice meal indeed. Bruh Fowl pecked into the soft potatoes, taking his sweet time. He blew on the skin to cool them down. His beak moved slowly up and down while he swallowed loudly. Hyena took a step forward, ready to pounce.
Take it easy, Hyena. Give me a chance.
Bruh Fowl's feathers were really ruffled now. He began to peel off the charred skin from the yellowed plantain.
Are you sure you don't want any, Hyena? There's plenty for you too.
Just hurry up, Bruh Fowl. I'm tired of waiting.
Hyena was already picturing making curry chicken when his sharp ears picked up the sound of a low, deep growl. He looked up and saw two amber eyes glinting through the grass. Black stripes across a face appeared next. Then a body followed majestically.
Tiger, I'm so glad to see you, smiled Bruh Fowl.
Well, what is going on here? A hyena and a bird having dinner together.
Tiger circled the fire, keeping his eyes on them both. Bruh Fowl mopped his brow and began explaining to Tiger that Hyena wanted to eat him.
He won't let me finish my meal first in peace.
That is an interesting situation.
Tiger stretched out his front paws, letting his body drape heavily on the ground.
Bruh Fowl is right. Leave him to eat his food.
His words flew from his mouth like poison darts. Hyena sucked his teeth and snarled.
Then,
drawled Tiger,
you can eat him, and I can eat you.
Suddenly, the forest nightfall became silent. The monkeys stopped howling, the mosquitoes stopped buzzing, and even the rats stopped running. The sweet air that carried the scent of roasting food vanished.
A hyena with a belly of fowl will make a delicious meal.
Laughed Tiger. Now, you may already know that hyena is a pretty fast animal. They often run in packs and can catch large prey, but they aren't the most intelligent animals. In fact, it's fair to say that quick thinking is not in their skill set. Bruh Fowl, on the other hand, had a swift mind. He nodded in agreement with Tiger and swallowed his last sweet potato.
Oh, all that food made me thirsty,
declared Bruh Fowl.
Let me just catch a drink in the stream over there to help my food go down.
Tiger thought that sounded fine. Everyone knew that Bruh Fowl was slow and feeble. Waddling on his two stick legs, Tiger kept his eyes fixed on Hyena. while they both waited for Bruh Fowl to return. As soon as he was out of sight, Bruh Fowl scrambled away as fast as his webbed feet could carry him. He ran this way and that way, twisting and turning, and soon had enough speed to flap his wings and fly. It was only about 10 feet, but it was high enough to get him away from those two cats. Jack Mandora, me no choose none. Story number 3. Anansi, Tiger, and the Magic Stools. In the days gone by, Monkey was in charge of dealing out justice. No one knows how this came to be, but he was. Holding court in a palace without walls or doors, sitting in judgment in the middle of the forest. This was how the story goes. There were 10 magic stools, but 9 of them were exactly the same. Each one about 2 feet high and carved from the darkest mahogany trees. The 10th stool, the only one that was different. This stool was similar in size and shape, but made of pure, solid, shiny gold. The wooden stools were positioned in a circle with the 10th gold stool in the middle. Monkey and his chiefs of justice would swing from vine to vine, guarding the stools and listening to cases. Anyone accused of a crime would be brought in front of Monkey and asked to step on each magic stool, counting as they walked. If they were guilty of their crime, the magic stools would know. The accused would stand on the 10th golden stool and then instantly drop dead. That's how it went. I'm going to tell you about the day when these judgments took a particularly nasty turn. Dog and Crab were lined up before Monkey, each one accused by Goat of stealing his yams. Lots of people turned out to see what would happen. These were the days when capital punishment was a bit of a sport. Lizard picked out a good spot on a tamarind tree where he hung upside down. Rat brought his family of 7 rats and they spread themselves out along the bushes. Monkey put on his special dark crimson robe reserved for judgment days. He sat on a bamboo throne, chewing on a piece of sugar cane, and looked down upon Dog. You stand accused of stealing goat's yams and sharing them with Crab. What do you say? Dog scrunched up his face so that his black eyes were almost hidden by his long black fur. His lips curled up in a snarl. He was vexed and couldn't believe he had to answer to Monkey. I didn't steal his damn yams. Goat is a liar, barked Dog. Monkey ordered him to count the magic stools and accept his fate. Dog stepped on to the first mahogany stool and yelled out, 1. He continued until he got to 9 and then stepped onto the gold stool and yelled, 10. He dropped down dead. What a commotion that caused. Dog's family started wailing and crying. There was a lot of barking and growling too. They were upset and furious with no one to blame. While all of this was going on, no one realized that Tiger had been prowling around the edge of the court. His eyes was bloodshot and his belly was empty. He needed to kill. Before Dog's family could take his body away, Tiger pounced. There was a flash of white teeth as his long body flew into the circle. He grabbed Dog by the neck and ran into the forest. There was such a commotion. Monkey was shrieking and yelling, His chiefs were jumping and climbing. Everyone started running around hiding. This continued to happen every single day. Tiger was on the rampage. Someone would come to judgment, and as soon as they counted the 10th golden stool and dropped dead, Tiger would pounce from the bushes, terrorizing everyone in the court. Monkey and his chiefs got scared and ran away, leaving Tiger in charge. This was exactly what he wanted. Tiger stretched out on the bamboo throne, with his legs cocked up on the side, waiting for his next victim. It was Crab. He sidled up, expecting to see Monkey's back, wanting to plead his case. Instead, he met Tiger. Oh, sorry, Tiger. I was looking for monkeys, stammered Crab.
He's not here. I'm in charge.
Tiger licked his paw. A sly smile came across his face.
Count the stools, Crab. Let's see what happens.
Crab tried to sidestep away, but it was no use. Tiger roared at him and said,
I said count the stools.
Poor Crab had no choice. He climbed up and began counting and stepping. When he reached the 10th stool in the middle of the circle, he fell down dead. Tiger burst out laughing before picking him up and swallowing him whole with one mighty, delicious crunch. Well, you can imagine how panic had spread throughout the forest. All of the animals were talking about Tiger and how he had taken control. Once word got to our clever friend, Anansi, he knew that he had to do something to get rid of Tiger. He set out for the court, racking his brains on what he could do when he bumped into wise old woman on the road.
How you doing? Are you headed to the court, Anansi?
She asked. Yes, old woman, yes. He nodded his head, but carried on walking. I can't stop. I'm on serious business. Nancy tried to hurry past, but wise old woman wasn't finished yet. She carried a bag of herbs around her waist, which she tapped lightly.
I think you're going to need my help to beat Tiger,
she offered. Anansi was in no mood to chat, not even to a wise old woman. I'll speak to you later, he said, and pushed past her without even looking back.
You'll regret this, Anansi. I have plenty of spells. Plenty.
She raged after him, shaking her stick in the air. Anansi found Tiger strutting around the court like a newly appointed king. He had Monkey's crimson robe draped over his long black stripes, and all you could see were the tips of his white paws padding around the throne. Without Tiger seeing him, Anansi climbed up into a banana tree and sat back comfortably, peeling a banana, looking as if he'd been there all day. Tiger looked up and saw him. He couldn't believe his audacity.
Anansi, what are you doing here?
Bellowed Tiger. He didn't trust or like Anansi and knew he must be up to no good. I'm just thinking, smiled Anansi, getting more comfortable in the tree.
What about?
Oh, said the trickster. I was thinking how clever I am. He grinned. Anansi knew exactly where to aim at Tiger's ego.
If you're so clever, get down from that tree and count each of these stools.
Tiger was pacing in circles below the tree, imagining Anansi in the grip of his teeth.
Okay. But first, you move away. I need a bit of space, Tiger.
Anansi gathered his wits as Tiger backed away, and then he stepped onto the first mahogany stool. He looked calm and not in the least bit worried. This just annoyed Tiger even more.
Hurry up and move,
ordered Tiger. So Anansi began to count as he stepped from one stool to the next.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8.
Tiger's eyes narrowed as he watched him closely. He couldn't wait to pounce on Anansi's dead body.
9.
Anansi suddenly stopped moving and said,
And the last stool in the middle.
Tiger's mouth hung open in shock. He wasn't sure quite what happened, but he knew Anansi wasn't quite counting right.
Count properly, Anansi. Do it again,
yelled Tiger.
Okay. Calm down. I don't see what the problem is, but if you insist,
he replied and went back to the first stool to start again.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Anansi suddenly stopped moving and said,
And the last stool in the middle.
No, roared Tiger.
You are such a fool, Anansi. That's not what you do. This is how you count.
Tiger shook off his robe, leaped onto the first stool, and started to count. As he stepped across each stool,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
As soon as Tiger stood on the 10th golden stool, he dropped down dead. Anansi watched, his face beaming bright with a broad smile. Then he noticed a wise old woman lurking in the bush. He wondered why she had come. What business could she have here? He was just about to shoo her away when he, Anansi, noticed Tiger's huge body rise up from the floor. He stood up straight, very much alive, and shook his head as if dazed. Anansi leapt back in surprise, wondering if he was seeing things. It was very much Tiger, but this time looking less brash and a little more sheepish. He checked his body over, turned, and limped away into the forest. Wise old woman let out a deep laugh.
You think you're so clever, Nancy? But I told you, I have spells. Plenty of spells.
She tapped her bag of herbs and disappeared into the forest. After that, the throne stayed empty. No one wanted to rule. And that's how Tiger came back from the dead, and why Monkey prefers to stay in the trees. Jack Mandora, me no choose none. Story number 4. Anansi and Fire. Fire was one of those girls that everybody wanted to be around. She was bright, confident, and exciting. Anytime Fire was there, she was the center of attention. She just had a hypnotic way about her. In the evening, people sat around her telling stories way into the night. In the tropics, crickets chirped. Fireflies lit up the grass like twinkling fairy lights. And Fire comforted everyone with the heat of her flames. If there was a dance going on, Fire was there, dazzling in red and yellow. She'd put down the best dance moves, flickering to the left, swaying to the right. Her flames reached up into the sky. Everyone thought she was hot, especially Anansi. And he was a single man at this time. He'd had his eyes on Fire for a long time. He kept trying to think of ways that he could catch her, tame her, and keep her for himself. If any of you have known someone like Fire, you know they cannot be contained. They need their space. But Anansi liked a challenge, and so one day he headed into the bush. He passed his friend Rat, who was quite a distinguished looking fellow. One of those guys who is always dressed up smart. He considered himself quite dapper and always had a shiny new coat and a crisp looking haircut. "Where you off to in such a hurry, Anansi?" asked Rat.
"I'm going to try my luck with Fire tonight."
Anansi puffed up his tiny chest.
"Last time we chatted, there was definitely a spark between us."
Rat let out one big booming laugh. "You'll need more than luck, Anansi. She's way too hot for you." He scurried off laughing, leaving Anansi a bit aggravated. There was no love lost between those two. Regardless, Anansi carried on and soon found Fire sleeping under the flame tree. Some people call this tree the flamboyant tree in the Caribbean. It has beautiful, bright red flowers that fan out around its branches. Here was Fire, small and flickering at the root of the flame tree. She flared up instantly when she saw Anansi. My, Anansi, how nice of you to come and see me," she giggled, all bright and luminous. She'd been feeling lonely lately and really wanted some company. Anansi didn't step too close, but even from a distance, he could ooze charm.
"Look at you, Miss Fire. You are so pretty."
She giggled some more. "You think so, Anansi? You wouldn't lie to me now, would you?" Anansi put on his serious face. Well, the most serious he could conjure up.
"Would I lie to you, Miss Fire? Never."
He stepped a bit closer.
"Why, I was just telling my good friend Rat how I would like to spend some time with you."
Fire was getting really excited now. She encircled him with her flames. Anansi stood in the center, completely engulfed by fire.
"Hold on a minute. Slow down. I don't want to get burned,"
shrieked Anansi. Fire lowered herself and calmed down. "How are we going to spend any time together, Anansi?" She pouted and turned her back to him. The trickster racked his brains and said coyly,
Why don't we climb up into the mountainside together where we can be alone?"
Fire refused to turn around. She carried on, giving him the cold shoulder, with her flames flickering a cool blue.
"Tell me, what is it you want?"
He was starting to get irritated now. She folded her arms and said, "I want to come to your house. I can't be seen hanging out on street corners or mountains with you. My mom will get angry. Now, he really was in a dilemma. He desperately wanted to hang out with Fire. In private and in his house would be the best place. But he didn't want Fire to destroy it. So clever Miss Fire came up with a plan. She told him to lay down a trail of sand all the way to his house, up the steps and across the veranda, so that she could burn safely upon it. Then he needed to leave a few piles of rubbish inside his front room where she could blaze brightly, just for him. This sounded like a good plan. Anansi rushed home and swept from top to bottom. He made everything nice and clean. He even gave the front door of his wooden house a new lick of paint. It was a burning bright yellow, just as she'd instructed. He laid a trail of sand all the way down the village, up to his front steps and across his veranda. He collected twigs and rubbish and made a nice pile in his front room. Finally, he was ready for his date with Fire. Later that night, when the sea breeze blew in from the east, Fire came flickering through the forest. She picked up speed along the sandy trail, snaking around towering lime trees and thick mango groves. The breeze blew into Fire, carrying the smell of frying fish and pumpkin stew from the kitchens as she passed along the way in the village. Fire was growing in size and strength. When she finally reached the steps of Anansi's wood house, built up high on stilts, she was now a raging and roaring fire. He was in the front room waiting to greet her, adding the finishing touches to his piles of leaves, and by the time he saw her brilliant glow on the veranda, it was far too late. Fire burst through the door and lit up Anansi's entire house with flames. He leapt out of the way and dashed out through the back door, leaving her inside to blaze.
How is this, Anansi? Am I hot enough for you now?
She called out mischievously, her flames rising to the roof. Anansi watched, stunned, as his home was completely burned down by fire. And that, everyone, is why no one in the Caribbean lights a fire in their house to this day. Jack Mandora, me no choose not.
La Diablesse.
Long, long ago, on the Caribbean island of Martinique, the French still ruled and Creole was the spoken word. It emerged from the rich medley of French and African languages created by the enslaved Africans. On this picturesque island, the mountains would erupt and lava would flow freely into the valleys, burying everything in its wake. Hurricanes would rampage through villages, wiping our factories and ripping up trees. With all of these violent horrors lurking around the villages, it may surprise you to know who they feared most. La Diablesse. Some people said that she was a she-devil, a Jumbi, with a disfigured foot that resembles a hoof. Others said she was a witch,
roaming the highways alone, waiting to cast her vengeful spells on unsuspecting men. Everyone said to watch out, beware, and be on your guard for strangers in your village. The story goes that on one typically blazing hot day, people were stretched out on their verandas, sighing in the shade, watching nothing. Imagine a day so hot that even the air is languid, where each breath you take is slow and dragging movement. Two young men, Kabinla and Eku, were sitting outside of their boarding house. They stopped for lunch after working all morning at the sugar factory and sat staring into the distance, watching nothing in particular. The sweet scent of mango hung in the air from trees dotted around the houses. Goats ambled across the paths, nibbling at leaves and long grass. Kabinla, you notice how quiet it is today? Eku nudged his friend. Even though it was the middle of the day, with sunlight exposing every living thing, Eku felt a darkness creeping up around him. He glanced around. He had a sense of something was not quite right. Houses seemed hushed into silence with the shutters closed up. Trees appeared monstrous behind him, terror swaying with each branch. Kabinla, do you hear me? Eku asked his friend again. Ease me, Eku. Can't you see I'm busy? Eku followed Kabinla's gaze. Seemingly out of nowhere in the brilliant light of day, a tall, slender woman was striding through the village. Her pace was at odds with the sluggish heat of the day. Her long arms swayed back and forth, driving her body forward. Her colorful clothes draped unnaturally around her body, stiff and lifeless. She wore a short-sleeved blouse with a long madras skirt that fell rigid to the ground. Glimpses of her white ruffled petticoat could be seen as she glided along. Her face was partially hidden by a wide-brimmed straw hat. She was dark, serene, and heading their way. Look at her hips, are swaying. You see her eyes? Kabinla said in a daze. It's true. She did have the most exquisite-looking eyes, but they were not welcoming. They were cold and glassy, set deep into her face like obsidian rock. She went past the boarding house. Bonjour, Missy. Hello, sir. She nodded firmly without stopping. Bonjour, madame. Hello, madame, Kabinla replied. He jumped up from his seat and quickly fell in step with her. You look as sweet as molasses, he said with a wide grin. She did not reply or even look at him. And so it begins again, she sighed to herself. She was used to getting unwanted attention from men. At first, she felt flattered by it. As she traveled from village to village, seeking a new home after the loss of her own, men would compliment her, offer her work on their land, even appeared to befriend her. She had been naive, but now she could exact her revenge. She carried on striding while Kabinla carried on talking. I've never seen you here before. Kikote Usoti? Where are you from? Affairs of the chicken are not affairs of the goat, she replied, keeping her dark eyes facing straight ahead. She thought Kabinla was the same as all the others before him, the ones who would look right through her clothes to her dark naked skin, the ones who would undress her in their mind as they followed her every move. Why so serious? Kabinla wanted to know. I am in mourning. I died long ago. Perhaps she was just joking or trying to shock. Either way, Kabinla took no notice. Would you like some company? He offered, puffing up his chest. She stopped and stared at him for the first time. Before climbing up a tree, make sure you can climb down. Her tone was not unfriendly and yet not quite inviting. Under the brim of her hat, he saw his reflection in her eyes. Those dark eyes. I'm walking up high where the cinnamon spices grow, and the rainfall is plenty. Her voice seemed to soar right into the mountains when she spoke. Kabinla knew that she was heading far away from his village. He'd never make it back in time for his afternoon shift at the factory. He turned back to look at his friend. Eku was shaking his head and waving his arms, signaling for Kabinla to return. For some reason unknown to him, Kabinla felt compelled to go with this woman. He was captivated by her. Instead of heading back to his friend at the boarding house, he followed her right out of the village. They walked along the road from Balata, a path that twisted and turned with the barks of the trees. Iguanas were lazing across the branches, and manicos sniffed the grass with their long snouts. No other living person was around. They were completely alone. She marched on and kept steady pace. Without looking back, Kabinla struggled to keep up with her. Sweat dripping from his brow and his white shirt clung to his chest. He was used to this moist heat, but it seemed as if they had been walking for hours. He tried again to spark up conversation. Kishanu, really? What is your name? Fayodivi. Yes, she said. Her dimples deepened, barely concealing a smile. Mary. No. Isabel. No. Isaroa. You will never guess. I give up. Benla was out of breath. The air felt thin. They were high in the mountains now. Even though he was tired, he wanted to climb with her forever. She was walking faster, with no trace of tiredness or discomfort. Her long, brightly colored skirt dragged over the rocks. She was slightly ahead of him, just out of sight. He followed the sound of her ruffled petticoats. The smell of sweet cinnamon hung from the leaves. They must be close, he thought. Feeling a rush of dizzying excitement, he did not notice the darkness creeping in all around them. Earlier that afternoon, Eku had returned to work at the factory and was disappointed that Kabinla had left him to it. I can't believe he's run off to chase a bit of skirt, he grumbled to his friends. They laughed, accusing him of being jealous. After all, if a tall, striking woman spoke to them, who would not follow her? They worked until early evening. Once the sun had been swallowed up by the darkness, Eku headed home, wondering what tall tales his friends would conjure up for his absence. I bet he will say she kept him captive and wouldn't let him go. He laughed to himself, preparing to listen to all kinds of outlandish stories of how Kabinla had spent his afternoon while the rest of them were working hard. Back at the boarding house, he expected to see his friend sitting with his feet up on the veranda, sipping a bottle of beer, ready to boast about his afternoon. But Eku approached the steps. There was no sign of him sitting outside. The trees swayed gently, whispering all around him. The air felt lighter than it had today. Gone was the peculiar feeling of terror that he'd felt earlier. Perhaps Kabinla was hiding in his room. Eku knocked on the door. Hey man, what are you playing at? Where have you been? He waited for a reply or some movement from inside, but heard no answer. He pushed the door open and saw the room was empty. Perhaps he was helping to prepare dinner. He heard the sound of bowls being scraped and lids being placed onto clay pots. The smell of conch stew with onions and spices grabbed him. He realized he was hungry and needed to eat. He entered the kitchen and his grumbling grew to worry when there was no sign of Kabinla. They never missed a meal together. He ate quickly and decided to ask around. No one seemed worried. He's a grown man. What are you worrying about? Fear crept over Eku, as it was not like his friend to disappear for this long. He strolled outside and wandered around, asking anyone he saw if they knew where he had gone. Bonsoir. Good evening. Have you seen my friend Kabinla? About this tall, wearing a white shirt like mine? He gesticulated wildly to neighbors in the village. He was with a tall, elegant woman, a stranger. He walked off with her at lunchtime, explained Eku. No one took any notice except an elderly man who had been liming on the side of the road for most of the afternoon. He shook his head solemnly and asked Eku, Was the woman quite tall and walking fast? Yes, and she had a large straw hat. Did you see them? He asked again. No, he replied. Eku turned to leave. It sounds like La Diablesse. He stuttered loudly. Still shaking his head, Eku had run out of patience and was about to curse the man. Listen to me. La Diablesse is the she-devil who haunts these mountain roads. If your friend left with her, you might never see him again. Eku had heard these tall tales before, but didn't want to believe them. They were stories told to frighten and keep you from trusting strangers. There's no way a Jumbi spirit showed up in the broad daylight,
yelled Echo. The old man shook his head again.
Don't be so sure, young man. Some terrors appear right beside us in the day.
He shuffled off and left Echo wondering if there were any truth to these stories. Up in the mountains, the sun disappeared beneath the trees long ago, allowing the darkness to leap out. One minute, Benlau was scrambling along the rocky path, following the stranger's shapely silhouette. And then suddenly, he was plunged into darkness.
Where are you? I can't see you,
he cried out. He wasn't usually a fearful man, but he knew it was dangerous to be stumbling around at night. The night critters grew louder and he felt them close. She had not slowed down. She kept moving. He couldn't understand how she was able to navigate so deftly when he couldn't even see his own hands in front of his face. He reached out for her and lost his balance. She smiled in the darkness, surprised he had kept up with her for so long. She used to wait until they pounced, when their appetite overcame their senses. She could see it in their eyes. Now, she didn't wait. She pounced first.
So every wind, follow my voice,
she cried out. In the darkness, he heard her chant. The words rose up from her belly and clawed their way through her throat. He couldn't understand them, but he felt their power. Her voice thundered into the night.
Akweba, Akweba, mi dende, obonson. Akweba, Akweba, mi dende, obonson.
As she chanted, a violent gust of wind swirled around them. The shadows sank their teeth into his bones.
Are you scared?
Her voice was mocking. A chill crept up his spine. He suddenly felt like a spell was broken. He no longer found her captivating. He thought she was terrifying. Take my hand. She reached out and touched him. Her hand felt like stone, cold and bloodless.
Vine, come,
she ordered. Reluctantly, he followed her. She turned to look at him, half lit by the moonlight. He saw a wretched expression on her face. Everything was contorted. Her eyes flared with hell's fury. Her mouth gnarled and twisted like a tiger with its prey. He shrieked and shrank back further, moving away from her towards the cliff edge. His feet slipped in the dirt. He tried to lurch forward, but he lost his grip and fell swiftly over the edge. An empty cry came from his lips as he hit the rocks 2,000 feet below. No one heard him except La Diablesse. There, in the moonlight, you could see the imprint of her hoof mark in the dirt as she shuffled away. Juan Bobo and the Pig. Juan Bobo, Mama said, either you come to church with me or you take care of the pig. I will take care of the pig, Mama. As soon as Mama left for church, the pig began to squeal. Do you want to go to church? Juan Bobo asked the pig. The pig squealed. All right, said Juan Bobo. Juan Bobo brushed the pig's teeth with Mama's toothbrush. Then he got Mama's new dress. This new dress is too long, said Juan Bobo. He ripped the dress in half. He put the top half on the pig. The pig squealed.
Wait, said Juan Bobo. You cannot go out like that. You need a mantilla. Mama always wears a mantilla on her head to go to church. Juan Bobo could not find a mantilla, but he did find a hammock. He tied the hammock around the pig's head. You look very pretty, he said, but not pretty enough for church. Juan Bobo put high-heel shoes on the pig's feet. He put earrings on her ears, and he powdered her face until it was all white. Then Juan Bobo dumped a bottle of perfume over the pig. Now you will smell good in church. Juan Bobo put 4 dimes in a handkerchief. He put the handkerchief under the pig's dress. Mama takes money to church, Juan Bobo told the pig. You should too. Now, go, said Juan Bobo, or you will be late. The pig ran and ran until she came to a puddle, and then she stopped and rolled in the mud. She tore the dress. She lost the earrings. Her mantilla flew in the air. Mama found the pig on her way home from church. She grabbed the squealing pig and dragged her home. By the time they got home, Mama was covered with mud. She was too angry to speak. Juan Bobo stared at Mama. He stared at the pig. He scratched his head. Then he smiled. Mama, Juan Bobo said, I didn't know you could play with mud at church. Next Sunday, I want to go to church too. The end. A dime, a jug. Juan Bobo, Mama scolded, stop tasting the sugarcane syrup or you're going to have to pay for it. Mama put corks in the jugs. Go sell this syrup to the widows, she told Juan Bobo. Ask them for a dime a jug. Who's the widows? Juan Bobo asked. They are the ones who will be coming out of church soon. They wear skinny black dresses and carry fans. They are small and speak softly. All right, said Juan Bobo. He grabbed the jugs and left. On the way to church, Juan Bobo saw a handkerchief lying in the mud. He picked up the handkerchief. Out popped 4 dimes. What luck, said Juan Bobo. He put the dimes in his pocket and kept walking. But when he walked around the big mud puddle, he took the wrong path. After hours of walking up one hill and down the next, he came to a sugar mill. That must be the church, Juan Bobo thought. Syrup! Delicious syrup! He cried. 4 flies flew out of the mill. Shiny black dresses? Juan Bobo thought. He saw the flies' wings. Fans, he thought. The flies came closer. They are small, Juan Bobo told himself. He heard the flies buzz. And they speak softly. They must be the widows. Syrup? Juan Bobo called. A dime a jug. But the flies just flew around and around the jugs. All right, Juan Bobo said. I will open the jugs for you. He pulled out the corks, and the flies flew into the jugs. Stop, yelled Juan Bobo. Stop tasting the syrup, or you're going to pay for it. But the flies did not stop. Juan Bobo had to shake them out of the jugs. The flies began to fly away. Wait, Juan Bobo yelled. You have to pay for the syrup. Juan Bobo started to run after them, but he tripped and fell. The 4 dimes popped out of his pocket. Juan Bobo saw the dimes on the ground. They paid, Juan Bobo said. Then he remembered the jugs. Hey, widows! Juan Bobo called. You forgot your syrup! But the flies flew into the mill. Oh well, Juan Bobo said. If they don't like syrup, I do. He sat down and drank all the syrup. He left the empty jugs for the widows. It was dark when Wambobo got home. He gave Mama 4 dimes. I sold the jugs, Mama. I sold the jugs of syrup, he said. Mama hugged him. Tonight, Wambobo, you can eat as much as you want. No thanks, Mama, said Wambobo. Tonight I am very full. And off to bed he went. The end. Slowpoke slaughtered 4. Once and twice makes thrice. Upon a time there was a king, and the king had a daughter who loved every riddle that was put to her. No riddle was too difficult. The time came for his daughter to marry. The king sent out criers to spread the word that whoever brought a riddle the princess couldn't solve could become her husband and inherit the kingdom. But let her solve it, and the suitor would be hanged by the neck until dead. Since the princess was beautiful and the kingdom enormous, princes, marquises, sages, and professors from all over came courting, and all were strung up at the gallows as the princess guessed their riddles one after another. There was a widow living in the kingdom that had a son that had not been spoiled by the ways of the world. People were unkind and called him Wambobo. Juan, having heard tell of the king's proclamation, decided that he too would go to the palace with a riddle for the princess. His cautious mother tried to stop him, but Wambobo had made up his mind. At last, with a heavy heart, the mother gave her permission. While he saddled his mare, his mother made cassava cakes for Juan to take with him. Thinking it would be better for her good-hearted son to die peaceably on the road than at the gallows in the great city, she put a dose of poison into the cakes. Wambobo set out. After traveling a while, he got off his mare and lay down to take a nap under a mango tree. While he slept, the mare found the cassava cakes and ate them in one gulp. The cakes killed the mare instantly. Then 4 crows arrived to peck at the corpse, and the crows too were killed. Juan woke up, saw what happened, and continued his journey on foot after plucking the crows and stringing them around his neck. As he passed through some woods, some 7 thieves waylaid him and stole the plucked crows. When the thieves ate the crows, they fell over dead. Juan took one of the thieves' rifles and continued on, keeping an eye out for something to eat. He saw a squirrel, took aim, but missed. Instead, his shot found a rabbit that happened to be pregnant. He skinned the rabbit, then built a fire to roast it, using some newspapers that were lying nearby. He went on. He came to a river, and as he crossed the river, he looked down from the bridge and saw a dead horse with 3 crows on it, floating in the water. At last, he reached the palace gates and asked permission to present a riddle to the princess. When they saw him at court, they laughed, and some were stricken with pain, knowing the poor man was about to die. But Wambobo, unconcerned, went up to the princess and said to her with great seriousness, I started out on Slowpoke, and Slowpoke slaughtered 4. When these had murdered 7 more, I shot at what I thought I saw and killed what I couldn't see. The flesh I ate was not yet born, though fully cooked with words. And when I crossed from there to here, a corpse was carrying 3. The princess began to think. She had 3 days to solve the riddle. The first 2 nights, she tried to get the answer by having one of her maids, and then another, go to the room where Juan was staying. The third night, the princess herself slipped into Juan's room. "Let me have your nightgown," he said, "and also your ring. When morning comes, I will tell you what you need to know." The princess did as she was asked, and when morning came, Juan whispered the answer in her ear. So the princess explained the riddle before the court, and the king sentenced Juan to the gallows. The poor man asked permission to speak. "She didn't know the answer," he cried, "until I told her what to say." The king asked for proof. Juan held up the nightgown and ring. "Enough," the king cried, and he gave orders for the wedding to proceed immediately. The 2 were married and lived happily from that time on. For Juan Bobo turned out to be cleverer than the great princesses who had passed through the king's court. The end. Devil in the Church. Of all the places you might expect to meet up with the devil, you never figure to see him in church. Now, do you? But the devil have a lot of experience, and he say you got to fight fire with fire, water with water, and wind with wind. He don't have to hang around places like Sodom and Gomorrah, because he ain't needed there. Folks in those places already doing his bad work for him. Another thing, the devil can't always go around looking like the devil. If he did that, he ain't going to get nowhere. He got to pass himself off like ordinary people. Sometimes he even got to pray and shout like he been saved. Now, there ain't nothing more against the devil's nature than that, is there? I'll tell you what I mean. Well, one day, the devil looked around and said, "Sure is quiet around here. Ain't nothing bad happening today. Guess I'll go and make some trouble." So he picked out one small, half-sized devil and tell him, "Boy, you go on up there and corrupt some folks today. Make them mean and sinful. Get going now." This little devil, he got dressed up, tucked his tail in good, and went up to find some folks to make them sinful. He got to town just about church time on Sunday. When he saw all the folks going into the church, he said, "Look like to me, I got to go in there after those people." So he went into church, sat down in the back row, waiting till the service was over. Preacher preached, people moaned and shouted, and the little devil just sat and waited. When service was over, the little devil got busy running around trying to corrupt folks, telling them to do bad things. But they didn't pay him no mind, saying, "Don't believe I've ever seen you around here before, brother." Well, the little devil got mighty discouraged after a while and went home.
You corrupt a lot of good folks up there.
The big devil asked him. The little devil says.
Well,
The big devil said, kind of mad.
what you spend all your time at?
I went up just like you told me, the little devil said. All the folks were going to church, so I went in and sat in the back row till they got through. And then wouldn't no one talk to me after that? The big devil, he just shook his head, looking kind of sad at the little devil, like he was pretty stupid.
Man,
He said,
don't you know that if you going to get along, you got to fight fire with fire, water with water, iron with iron, and air with air? You got to go do what the other folks do. If you're going to go to church to do your work, you can't sit in the back row. You got to get up to the mourner's bench and shout and moan and groan with the rest of them. If you done that, wouldn't nobody have said they had never seen you before? If you're playing baseball with the folks, you got to hit a home run to win their respect. If you're doing it with music, you got to make them dance. And if you're doing it in a church, you really got to get sanctified. Man, you sure got a lot to learn.
the end. Story number 2. Preacher and the Devil. If you're going to stand there and allow, as you say, a bear sitting on Uncle Jim's porch reading a newspaper, that calls for some close examination. Could be you got yourself influenced into thinking you saw it. Could be there was a real bear there too, but 'tain't likely. I seen plenty of bears in my time, and ain't none of them learned their letters. The way people are, they're always trying to see something that other folks ain't seen. And that's a powerful influence on the imagination. And if they gets a little boost from the devil, ain't no telling what they going to come up with. Like the time the devil was moseying and trying to figure out some devilment to do. He done so many devilments in his time, he don't hardly think of new ones. Then he see the preacher coming along the road and he say to himself,
Man, I got a good one to do on the preacher. I'm going to get him to tell about the biggest lie folks around here ever heard.
So he tucked his tail inside his clothes good and act mighty sweet. When the preacher come along, he say,
Morning, Reverend. Mighty fine morning.
Yeah, brother, it sure is, preacher say. You a stranger around here?
Just passed through.
Devil say.
Reckon I'll be around till Monday or Tuesday.
Well, ain't that nice, preacher say. You'll be right welcome at the church tomorrow.
That's sure nice of you.
Devil say.
What you going to preach on?
Brother, preacher say, David and Goliath. It's my text for tomorrow.
That sounds fine to me.
Devil say.
How big you expect that Goliath was?
Well, brother, he was sure bigger than you and me. I reckon he might have stood about 9 feet tall. Devil shook his head.
Well, that's a disappointment to me. You know, things was a lot bigger in them old days. Everything was different. Take Methuselah. Now, didn't he live 900 years? If you say a man around here lived 100 years, that's pretty old. But if you talking about Methuselah, 100 years ain't nothing. If you telling folks that Goliath was only 9 feet tall, they ain't going to be interested. If you want to get the congregation of yours rocking and reeling, you got to make things real big, you know what I mean?
Devil, he went on talking this way. Preacher listening and taking it all in. I tell you what, preacher say, you going to be there tomorrow? You just sit in the front row and give me the nod if you think something got to be a little bigger. Bob your head up and down and I'll be much obliged.
Fine, the devil say. I'll sit right in the front row.
Next morning was Sunday, and when the preacher get up there to preach, he see this stranger sitting right in the front row, showing all his teeth. Preacher opened his Bible, slapped his hand on the table, and began. This morning, we're going to talk about David the shepherd boy, the preacher say. Right from the first book of Samuel, this boy, David, was a son of Jesse, and he was pretty sharp. And the Philistines was coming down on the Israelites, and they had a champion fighter amongst them named Goliath. Now, according to the good book, the Philistines sent their champion out to the field to challenge the stoutest man amongst the Israelites to fight. And he stood up there in the middle of the field, and wasn't no Israelite wanted to fight him, because Goliath was 6 cubits tall, and that makes him 9 feet head to toe. Preacher looked down in the first row to see what this stranger thinks, and he see the devil bobbing his head up and down. So the preacher think he can do a little better by Goliath and say, come to think of it, that 9 feet was before he was altogether full grown. He was 8 cubits tall, and that makes him 12 feet top to bottom. Preacher sees the devil still bobbing his head. But that was before he stretched himself out to his full height. Preacher tells the congregation, you might say he was closer to 15 and 20 feet altogether. Fact is, I'm pretty sure he was about as high as the steeple on a Presbyterian church. And that was only when he was a little bit hunched down. Devil stopped bobbing his head and showed his teeth, so preacher relaxed a bit. Yes, brothers and sisters. And this man had a spear that weighed more than 50 pounds. And the shaft was 60 feet long. Preacher looked down and see the devil pushing out his lips and shaking his head up and down like he was mighty put out. So the preacher said, but looking at it, that spear weighed around 400 pounds and was as big around the shaft as the old elm tree in the front. Well, then David the shepherd boy come out across the field with his slingshot and picked up a stone about as big as a buckshot. Preacher see the devil bobbing his head like it was about to fall off. Well then, about as big as a watermelon, he say. Devil's head was still bobbing. Come to think of it, that stone was about as big as a bale of cotton, and if you figure that's the size of it and made the stone all the way through, it must have weighed more than 1,000 pounds. And David, the shepherd boy, only about 5 feet 4 tall, or maybe only 4 foot 5. Or
I guess you could say he was only about half that size. Hit Goliath in the head with that stone from his slingshot and killed him dead. And when Goliath fell, he was so tall he stretched on the ground from Shaka to Azeka. Preacher looked sideways to see the devil bobbing his head, something awful, and he said, Old Goliath stretched, you might say, from Shaka to Jerusalem. Devil sat there still bobbing away. You might say Goliath stretched all the way from Shaka to Mobile. Preacher say, and if we don't adjourn this meeting right now, we're going to have him laying right on top of us. The end.
Thank you, my friends, for coming on this voyage. Thanks to Art by Chalet for the logo, episode, and shirt designs. You can get t-shirts and other items on tpublic.com. You can contact me on all socials at AfroTalesCast. That's AfroTalesCast. And email me at AfroTalesCast@gmail.com. You may also become a benefactor by simply sharing with any and everyone, giving a thumbs up, a 5-star rating and review in your podcast app of choice, or simply donating on Patreon or Ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. So until we meet again, may your winds be fair and your seas follow.